formation director. I tend to have other people help me with this role, because it's a big one. And Mike is going to come up and review the reading that John sent out. And so thank you, Mike, for helping. And there was another presentation, but do you guys have the greatest philosopher ever known book? You do not have that. She probably needs that.
She needs that as well.
Where's Carol?
So after Mike's talk and questions, and when you guys start to do interviews, I would like to show a little 12-minute video.
Yep, that was on the docket. So he wants to talk about first Saturdays.
Do you want to do it on this?
Yeah.
You don't have a computer.
Yeah. Okay.
So it'll be a
so
little later though.
You guys will can have the first Saturday discussion while we're
right. Yeah.
Yes. Very good. Because some people will be getting interviewed and some will be being interviewing, but there'll be other people just doing nothing except. What an excellent time to listen to
yes.
Matt.
Yeah. So it'll be good.
Yeah, it's first Saturdays in communions of reparation.
Good, in reparations. We need lots of us. So remember to pray and fast for our church and our country, and especially for those also who are new. We have a prayer apostolate. New prayer apostolate is every day is covered at least by 1 hour of someone praying in the Blessed Sacrament for the intentions under the mantle of St. Margaret of Castile. So St. Margaret of Castile is our chapter patroness. And she is a saint I think is needed for our times. She suffered so much injustice gracefully and without bitterness. And that's part of what we need in our times is the victimhood mentality is extremely destructive and bitterness is extremely destructive.
Spiritual victimhood, not victim victimhood.
The proper type of victimhood. Well, this offering up our sacrifices for the salvation of others, right? And part of the Dominican charism is to bring others to Christ. Our preaching is to bring others to Christ. Everything that we do is to bring others to Christ. So if you are willing to pray for an hour in front of the Blessed Sacrament for the intentions, especially of the laity, we pray for people who run apostolates, who work for the laity, we pray for the priests and in their interactions with the laity. And we have a prayer intentions list on groups IO that people request prayer, regular prayer. But I especially ask people who are running programs to put their programs underneath the mantle of St. Margaret so that we can continually, daily, in front of the Blessed Sacrament, pray for them. So if you're interested, it's on the website under Home. St. Margaret's Mantle is what the apostle is called. Okay. Mike, you're up.
Hi. I'm going to talk today, it's actually just the first chapter of the book called The Apostolic Ideal of the Early Dominicans. I thought, before I leap into this, that I had already made a presentation about it, but I haven't. There was a similar book by a Dominican by the name of Vicaire, who also wrote about the apostolic life of the Dominicans, and that's the one I made my previous presentation about, I don't know, 10 years ago. Anyhow, this is by Eugene Caccia, and if you had, I might already read this up, but you don't need it because it's on the DominicanIdaho.org website anyhow. So,
can I ask one quick, this is a dumb question here. Who's in charge of putting up all the images, like for each month on the website? Like who here knows, like who's in charge of that?
John.
if you hear crickets, it's because I think we're waiting for somebody to take that on.
Oh, I've seen different pictures, but I was looking at it. This is beautiful. So that's whoever did it. It's a nice
John finds the image.
Yeah.
So I was wrong.
I
didn't want to claim it.
What Mike is talking about is the provincial website.
Yeah,
I think you're referencing Dominican Idaho.
Yes, yeah. Those are just gorgeous pictures, so thank you. I appreciate
We are in the midst of getting the new prevention website.
Gotcha. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Oh, yeah, there's a provincial website, OP Laity West, or OP West Laity? OP Laity West, right?
OP West Lady.
OPWestLaity.com, okay, yeah. Also very, very good resource, and we don't have the white paper, okay. There was a brief introduction to the, I'm really here to talk about chapter 1, but quickly about the introduction to this book. They talk a little bit about, what makes the Dominican identity. And they talked a bit about theology, the life, and the spirit. And an interesting thing that I ran into is that they talk about theology is that, well, for the first few years, the Dominicans were Victorine. Okay, what's that? And I dug into it, and there was an abbey built in Paris, the St. Victor's. And from that abbey, there were a series of philosophers, one perhaps most famously, Hugh of St. Victor, and they were quite influential in the 12th century and early 13th century. He says, and the author goes on to say, then, Thomas became an embodiment of the Dominican theological tradition, and how much Thomas might have in common with the Victorines, I don't know. Then he talks about the Dominican life, and he said, well, he adopted a rule that's similar to that of the Canons Regular. The Canons Regular also used the rule of St. Augustine. So what is unique then about the Dominicans, he said, was why the spirit of the apostolic ideal that the Dominicans embraced. So what is an apostolic ideal? It has several components, and you can just think of those 12 men back at the, that were selected by Jesus Christ. One of the things they are to do is proclaim doctrine, go therefore and teach all nations, right? So we often hear about how they're just a bunch of simple fishermen, but they in fact spent 3 years studying intensely at the foot of the Lord and learned a lot. 2 of them went on to write Gospels, others went on to write epistles, and so from whatever their original callings were, they went on to learn a lot, and education to support the proclamation of doctrine is an important part of the apostolic ideal, as is holiness of life. And holiness of life is in one important way, manifested through the practice of evangelical poverty. I don't recall what makes what he meant by evangelical poverty in particular. But one thing we might say about the Dominicans, kind of like the apostles, unlike those who are intensely concerned with mortification, which is common among some of the great Dominican saints who practice mortification intensely, like St. Rose of Lima. But an evangelical poverty, I think one will think of it as the Lord said, well, I want you to go out. I want you to go to that place. Just take one cloak. Don't worry about stuff. So one of the importances of this kind of poverty is you don't have strings attached. You're ready to go and do what you need to do, because it does it. Like if you have property, well, you better go over there and take care of the fence needs repair, and maybe we need to do something about the windows. So you have a lot of possessions. You have a lot of concerns that might be other than doing the Lord's work, right? So that's one of the values of evangelical poverty, as well as the fact that it is a good sign to the outside world of what your dedication is. And one thing he did not mention about the apostolic ideal, but I think the other author did, is one of itinerancy. That is, you're going out, right? So it was just the other day, it was the feast of St. Matthew, and I hadn't heard this before. They said, well, Matthew died in Ethiopia. You know, so these guys, they all came from somewhere around the Sea of Galilee. You know, James went to Spain. Peter and Paul went to Rome. Andrew went to Greece and beyond, I don't know. The land of the Scythians, that's maybe Ukraine today, I don't know. Thomas went to India, and Matthew went to Ethiopia. They're going all over the world, right? Go forward, and teach all nations. And they took that seriously, right? And that, as though it's not really necessarily delved into in this first chapter, it's certainly stamped upon the life of the Dominicans. It's a bit of a digression. The Benedictines take a vow of stability.
Yeah.
You know, you're coming into this abbey. You will live here the rest of your life. You will be buried here, right? So that's they have stability. And those of us who have worked with the various Dominican friars know that, it's 2023. Where's Father Kelber now? You know, because they're constantly being moved around. They live this itinerant lifestyle. And where did they get it? They got it from the apostles. It's part of the apostolic ideal. We're going out to the world to teach all nations. So, Dominic gradually reached an understanding and gradually embraced this apostolic ideal. But by the time he was ready to found the orders of preachers, it had crystallized in his mind. There was a hunger among the faithful for the apostolic ideal. And in the first millennium of Christianity, you know, we saw stuff like one thing we saw is the foundation of abbeys with these stabili. So there's a monastery here, there's a monastery there. Another thing we saw in the first millennium was how conversions worked. And there was a way of, you could hit a home run. So we converted Constantine in the 300s. Then after that, there was the conversion of, you know, King Clovis of France in 508. And the conversion of King Ethelbert of Kent. And after that, England. So you convert the king, and then you convert the whole country. Then there was a series of a lot of knocked off in the 900s. There was Mieszko in Poland, Harold in Denmark, Olaf in Norway, Vladimir in the Ukraine, and Stephen in Hungary. You know, convert the king, you get the country. So one of the problems with this is we're proceeding this sort of top-down evangelization. By the 1100s, certainly by the 1200s, things had changed a bit. There had a gradual improvement in the security situation. The Vikings are not coming after you, the Magyars aren't coming after you. And not only is there an improvement in security, there's also improvement in living standards, the beginning of the forming of towns. And so the common man now wants to be catechized. In fact, there's a monastery out there in the boonies someplace that doesn't help him living in a small town. He wants to have preaching. He wants to be catechized. He wants to see examples of virtue. He wants to have the leaders of the church sort of engage him personally. And not say, well, you're a peasant, do what the king says, right? I ain't gonna buy that. You know, if you want me to believe what you're teaching, then come and teach me, right? And actually, this is a time when there was openings for various heresies, right? There was Waldensians were actually started out as, valid Christians, but they eventually became separated from the church because they refused to take orders to somewhat. And then there's the Albigensians, who are really they're not really Christians at all. They pretend to be Christians long enough to get you into their clutches, and then you'll eventually reveal to you that they have a completely different set of teachings. But if you haven't been taught, you might not even know that those teachings are different from Christian teachings, right? So there was this fertile ground of people who were demanding preachers and teachers following the apostolic ideal, and a church that hadn't quite come up to speed yet. The chapter does mention a few leaders from the 1100s. It said none of them really lived beyond their lifetime, and I think one correction to that is he mentioned St. Norbert, and we still have Norbertines today. Like I think the chaplain of Catholic Answers Live is a Norbertine. So, but we reached the early 1200s, and there's this hole here. There's this need, and St. Dominic was well suited to fill it. So we mentioned that you want to be capable of proclaiming doctrine, and you want to have holiness of life, and then I mentioned itinerancy. But Dominic early on excelled in both his education and in his holiness of life. But he took vows to be a canon, which means you're associated with a particular cathedral. The canons had become a strong movement. They date back to the early church, but at this time they are essentially secular priests, diocesan priests who are associated with the cathedral. They live according to the order of St. Augustine, and they study and preach at the cathedral. So what they don't have here yet is that go therefore to all nations. That was the thing he didn't have yet. But he excelled both in his virtue and in his education. After he was ordained and became a canon, he was working for a bishop named Diego Acevedo, and was sent on a diplomatic mission to Denmark? To the Marches, wherever that is, in order to obtain a wife for the son of the King of Castile. And with the Bishop Diego, Dominic traveled through Europe. On his way back, he stopped at Rome. They wanted to go and evangelize the Cumans, who were one of these tribes from Central Asia who were causing a lot of ruckus at that time. They kind of vanished in history because shortly afterward along came the Mongol, who was the biggest and baddest of the Central Asian pirates or pillagers, So they asked the Pope, "Can we go on a mission?" He said, "No, you go back." And on their way back, they stopped in Montpellier in France and encountered the Albigensian heresy. And they also encountered papal legates who were there to try to combat the papal legacy, the Albigensian heresy. And the bishop and Dominic understood things that had to be changed about how you went about combating this. So, for instance, they were dressed in finery. These papal legates were dressed in, they had the fine horses. They had the retinue. All this can be traced back to you hit your home run in the first millennium by converting the king, right? But that kind of behavior isn't going to help you if you try to work with the townspeople. they're looking for somebody who's practicing the apostolic ideal. It's kind of like today, if you don't mind saying this. If somebody is flying back and forth in their private jet, you know, it's like a climate activist who wants to come and talk to us about giving up on the internal combustion engine, the fact that you're flying around in your private jet automatically makes me not want to listen to you, regardless of the validity of what you might have to say. And so that's really what these guys were running up against, because they were looking too good to go talk to the common man. And so Dominic and Diego said, no, you have to embrace this evangelical poverty. And Dominic would walk barefoot, and he walked and walked. I've heard it referred to as an athlete of God. But people like the Albigenses, we're going to play a church rock, we're going to lead through brambles and thorns, and I just walked through barefoot anyhow, and that would say, well, thank you so much. So, long story short, the apostolic ideal that they used to combat the heresy included evangelical poverty, disputation with heretics, that is, you believe in Albigensianism, I'm going to engage you in a conversation and see, I'm going to place Catholicism against Albigensianism, and we'll see who can state their case the better. And then an exhortation of the common people. So Tom was talking about Kreeft. That was a comment formed by Dominic, where he placed young women who had been under the influence of the Albigensians, and then after they were converted back. So what do we do now? I said, well, you can come here to Kreeft, and they did a contemplative life as well as a teaching life. So it's a long story about the fight with the Albigensians, and a lot of history involved as well. But what Dominic learned from those years, he took with him to the foundation of the order, which kind of occurred between the years 1215 and 1217. In 1215, there was a Lateran Council, the fourth, and Dominic went there, as did Francis of Assisi. Another champion of the apostolic ideal, slightly different. But the two of them were both there at the council, and met Innocent III, who said, Dominic back, said, well, maybe we can found an order, but you have to select one of the existing rules. And Dominic went back, and with his people, a group of 15 or so at the time, it was a small group, and they all agreed, yeah, the rule of St. Augustine, and then we'll add a little bit of, particulars to it. And then we went back to Rome, and in the meantime, Innocent III had died, the new Pope Honorius III was there, and it was, perhaps a bit of apprehension about meeting the new Pope, but the new Pope approved the foundation of the order in late 1216, and Dominic came back to Toulouse in France, where at the time where his 15 followers were gathered together, and on the Feast of the Assumption in 1217, he did with his original Dominicans. It's pretty much the same thing that the Lord did with his disciples. He started sending them out 2 by 2. They did, well, wait a minute, we need to have a community, and that's true as well. So it's been a constant tension among the Dominicans that they want the community life. However, they also need to be perpetually traveling to where the mission takes them. So he sent men to Portugal, men to Spain, men to England, a whole bunch of them to Paris. A couple of them stayed in Toulouse, and Dominic and one of his companions went to Italy. And so they were sent out 2 by 2, take nothing with you. You know, as though he'd taken the gospel and decided, that's how we're going to live today in the year 1217. So that was Dominic's embrace of the apostolic ideal, which continues to form what Dominicans do until this day. Which is why, where is Father Calver this year anyhow? Oh, Father James Moore, yeah, is now just, we've known him as it's like a vice,
He's the
vice
development officer.
development officer. Well, he's now
He
moving
goes
to
around and
Anchorage.
asks for money, that's what he did.
He's moving to Anchorage, Alaska, where he's going to be running a parish where my son actually is a Christian.
Yeah, exactly. Michael, you might invite questions.
Yeah.
Either online or here.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Can you tell us a little about the use of the rosary by the early Dominicans in the Apostolic?
Well, I can tell you very little about it. I mean, there is the tradition that Dominic received the rosary from the Blessed Mother while he was working among the Albigensians, that which in the period between 1205 and 1215. Exactly when he received the rosary is not recorded, so within a date. He used it largely when he was teaching people. Here's something that you can use to pray with, and he, encouraged them to, there were mysteries of the rosary that you could use to meditate upon as you prayed. In histories that I've read, though, how the rosary was embraced by all of the Dominicans in the first 100 years, I haven't read that much about it. It's just that there is the tradition that Dominic received the rosary from the Blessed Mother, and it was before the actual foundation of the order. Another, St. John was talking about the Blessed Mother being the top patroness. Another important event early in the history of the order, actually the first year or so, there was a young man who had been who was going to travel to the Holy Land in pilgrimage and got deathly ill when he reached Rome, which is where Dominic was at the time. His name was Reginald. And Dominic prayed for Reginald to be to have his life spared. He said, "Could we borrow him for a while? Could we borrow him?" And so Reginald was healed from his terrible disease and decided to become a Dominican. But to him, the Blessed Mother appeared and said, provided the original Dominican habit. The Dominican habit was given to Reginald of Orleans by the Blessed Mother as he was recovering from his first blast of illness, and that became the habit of the order. Reginald, and because Dominic did say, "Can I borrow him?" Reginald did die about a year and a half later, but before then he managed to bring a whole bunch of people into the order. I mean, it was a fruitful year and a half. Yeah, he worked as a Dominican. And he did this under the tutelage of the Blessed Mother.
Reginald must have been a much more common name at that point in time. You see Reginald of Orleans there.
Yeah.
Then there's Reginald of Pirno, which would have been like a years or so later.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never met anybody actually named Reginald.
They went to Reggie, right? Reggie? But it was probably, Reginald, right? And it might have been a more common French name than an English name.
Well, and when kings were popular, as a
It has one.
Anything else? Is there anything from here?
No, please.
Nobody, okay, all right.
No comments in here.
Oh,
Is
okay.
there any
Yeah.
online questions?
Oh, it's all right here. Everything, I'll be able to see it.
That's what I'm just looking
Yeah,
at.
okay.
Yeah, feel free to unmute or to tap it, type it in the comments, but yeah, it's like there's not much.
So, one observation I have from reading The Secret of the Rosary by St. Marie de Montfort is that it's very commonly spoken about the legates and their rich apparel and how the Albigensians were despising the body and all the riches and stuff like that. And that Dominic, being a beggar and the Dominicans, that enabled them to be successful. But Dominic, according to St. Marie de Montfort, attributes his success to the rosary as the battering ram that gained the graces for conversion. So I'm not saying that the evangelical poverty wasn't part of it, but it seems like the main thing was the graces obtained by Our Lady through that method of prayer. And if you look at the joyful mysteries, they're all laid out in 2 chapters in St. Luke. So it's a very easy introduction into the life of meditation.
Yeah.
Contemplation.
So,
And
you
you
can actually, this doesn't, he doesn't talk about the rosary, but if you were to read either Father Lacordaire or Sister Dorsey's biographies of Dominic, they do talk about the rosary and what a key role it played in his work in Southern France.
And
Which is
particularly if you look at
this reading.
the joyful mysteries, they directly attack the errors of the Albigensians who say that the body is evil. And this is sort of a resurrection of the Manichaean heresy that Augustine was deceived by and then fought. Because you see the incarnation particularly shows that God's creation is good. The bodily creation is good. Right? And you see with St. Francis at the same time, not in the same place, promotion of devotion to the infant Jesus in the manger. We have all these cribs and creches and all this stuff. That all started with St. Francis of Assisi. They didn't celebrate it that way before that.
All right, thank you.
I have a quick comment, is that okay?
Okay.
Is a comment okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, not maybe as quite as learned as these 2 gentlemen. But what sticks out to me is in the reading was the part that we've all heard before, of course I just missed the spot, but it says, for an apostle, this is on page 4 and then to page 5, it says, for an apostle is a preacher not only by word but also by deed. This is something that you're reading upon in your talk. And it just really makes me think, I'm talking about the legates coming with their fancy, stuff on, and there's Dominic, and how he was able to kind of speak the language of the people, and that way, could impress them even more so than the Albigensians. He was more Albigensian than Albigensian in some ways, right? And
More common man.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. You could take, to move through the brambles. Hey, thanks a lot,
Yeah.
right? Kind of. And what struck me, is like today, obviously, we live in a world that seems to worship, pleasure and things like that. On the one hand, but on the other hand, you also spoke about, the kind of history of Dominicans self-doing mortification and things like that, right? So, but like the idea of doing something, mortifying yourself, I think for people today, like, what? That's crazy. On the one hand, especially we live in a time that seems to really worship pleasure and any avoidance of any type of pain. However, right, we can look at some people, and the person that pops in my mind, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, and we can probably not be appropriate to watch him here because he has, shall we say, colorful language. Consistent, colorful language. And he's definitely not a religious person, I don't think. He's definitely a secular person, but he's a guy named David Goggins. If anybody's familiar with him, he's a former SEAL and runs ultra marathons and stuff like that. And he has a pretty large social media presence. And he just does all kinds of just crazy amounts of physical things. And he lives a very simple life and has a couple best-selling books. But people are unbelievably attracted, I think, to him and listening to him because of this kind of a modern-day mortification of the flesh. And really, he's not going around just telling you stuff. He's doing it through the way he lives. And so I think that, you know, that attractiveness of that is not, you know, didn't die in the 1200s. It's here today, you know, as well, for sure. And I think that's just kind of an interesting thing to think about, and just kind of sparked in my mind.
Goggins, he has spoken a few times. He does have somewhat of a religious background, so he's spoken briefly about it sometime. He's but it is that authenticity that speaks to people. And you get the same thing with with Jordan Peterson. It's the authenticity of someone who has said something, and it's, you know, that's just, they've stood by him, right? So.
It's powerful. It's unbelievably powerful.
God,
that would make sense to me. Yeah.
Probably ought not to think of those papal legates as hypocrites or spoiled. I think they were following an ideal that had sort of lost its place. It was no longer the best way to reach the man of the day.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
You can get a sense of the authenticity of a person, which doesn't necessarily have to do with how fancy their dress is per se, right? Or even necessarily their manner of presentation. You see someone like Mother Teresa, extremely authentic. Not exactly, does not look like an imposing figure moving around. So the authenticity is there, and that speaks to people. And a lot depends, like right now, it gets back to some like the authenticity you would see in beautiful, like a beauty, the authenticity of beauty, that we tend to lack a lot. But so we've lost a lot of that, and that speaks to something. Like the smells and bells is authentic, and it has an air of authenticity to it that people connect with proper worship.
Yeah. David,
you know, John talked about what it is to be a Dominican, and I think when you speak with regard to authenticity, I think that's our challenge. If we can live an authentic Dominican life and put Christ first and foremost in our life above everything else, I think that authenticity can speak volumes. And it's interesting that we're bringing up secular people who don't have any kind of faith that we know of. They could have, but we don't know of it. And we're using them as examples. Whereas, in fact, we should be the example. We are the example by what we do and how we do it. And I think that's the biggest challenge, because just as there are people that will see that authenticity, there's always those naysayers that say, that's Dave, he's off his rocker, or that's, you know, Pam, she's off her rocker.
Right.
You know,
John the Baptist is off his rocker, but the Son of Man is just eating and drinking the whole time. Right.
So
that was a recent gospel, yeah.
I think that's really the challenge we have, and really the potential we have to live a life of grace. And you know, my current situation has brought that forefront to me. It's right in front of my eyes, and I can't ignore it anymore.
Actually, I'm glad you bring up what John had to say, because there was something that struck me. You know, he was talking about how sometimes what you hear in the gospel, and you go to mass, you come to the Dominican meeting, and there it is, hitting you right straight through the eyes, between the eyes. Well, so I went. I'm not breaking a seal because I was a penitent, but I went to confession. I said, you know, one of my problems is you know, the harboring of resentments, and so, you know, I have some resentments about people I know, and I also have resentments about people who are, you know, church leaders who are eager to change doctrines and stuff. And the father said, well, you know, you don't need to worry about the Lord taking care of his church, because he's quite capable of doing that. your job is to be faithful, right? So this is kind of a job of talking about, the watchman along the tower in Jerusalem that, we might be concerned about. Looks like some of the watchmen are wandering off, but the Lord will take care of his church. So, John actually was echoing the words of my confessor when he said that. It was kind of good to hear.
The only thing is he usually takes care of the church by raising up saints, so if you happen to be the one he wants to raise up, you better do it.
Right, yeah, better do it.
The saints are probably the best example we have, one of the best examples we have of an authentic life, authentic Catholic life. That's what it should be.
And if I can say one more thing just really quickly, back to what Josh was saying, during lunch I was talking to him, and I told Josh, or John this last summer together, our group, is I got to take some students to Europe this summer, and we got to, of course, go to bajillion churches and cathedrals and whatnot. And when I was was it Vienna or Salzburg, one of the two. Anyways, but we were just kind of walking in the middle of the day in this cathedral, and of course it's beautiful, it's huge, and it's cavernous and stone, and looking around at all the beauty and all that kind of fun stuff. And then someone was just, there wasn't a service or anything like that, and someone was just started to play the organ in there. And the power and the beauty and the reverberation off the stone, it just brought it to, and again, it wasn't even part of a religious ceremony, right? But just the power of that beauty was just, people just stopped. People just stopped. And there was a ton of people that just stopped. Whatever murmuring there was, gone. Mm-hmm. And it just stopped people in their tracks, and it just made me think, that power and that beauty is something that is authentic as well. And again, unfortunately, it's missing a lot of the churches we have here, right? I think I think authenticity is a word that we use too often in the folks give you an authentic jerk, right? Being authentically true to the Dominican life or something like that, right?
Authentic goodness.
Yeah, something along those lines, right? So I just want to echo what Josh was saying.
Thank you. I think that goes back to the discussion we had before. What's the difference between truth and honesty? You can be an honest jerk.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to say is that in calling, noting the secular world responding in like manner, it's not that they're necessarily religious, it's deeply embedded in us, especially the men. They're supposed to be that way. They're supposed to give sacrifice. I'm sorry, it's not politically correct, but truth dives into political correctness and separates it, right? The reality is that we are called to sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And we might respond in different ways. It might be a fleshly response. I know you're working hard on Exodus 90, which is very religious, kind of core of it. And I know others are doing their part in becoming physically fit so that they live and can profess the Word of God and move along. But I'm just saying that the response that men and women have to the call of God to sacrifice is a universal call, and it's built into our character as well. So just important to note.
You remember at the procession to Jerusalem, the Pharisees and scribes tell Jesus to tell his followers to stop, acclaiming him. He says,
even the rocks.
Yeah, if these don't, then the rocks. And I was thinking the cathedrals, right, because they proclaim the glory of God, and most of Europe is not.
And just one last comment. You can't be a truthful jerk. Seriously, if you think about it, the different, one's subjective and one's objective. I don't know who gets this. And then we'll be doing it on the way out.
It's time to wrap it up.
Well, I guess next we'll continue to talk. And those who, go to the library, wherever that is. Okay.
What we're going to do is going to call on each one of you if you want to have, are you going to be giving a question?
Well, I want to show a little 12-minute thing, and the one I sent out last month.
Fair enough, great. Well, then we'll be reaching for one of you at a time over the next little bit. And one thing that just I found interesting, do you know what apostolic means? The apostolic life. What does apostolic mean?
Social.
Huh?
To be sent.
To be sent out. And so that's just the Dominican charism, to be sent out. We aren't sitting in a monastery or in an abbey. We're in part of being sent out. So we're part of that tradition and charism. It's also where the word